When you're in a relationship with someone who has avoidant tendencies, love won't always look like what the movies taught you. It won't arrive on a silver platter of romantic gestures or verbal affirmations. You won't get constant reassurance or dreamy eye contact with deep, vulnerable confessions. In fact, sometimes what you get is the opposite. You get awkward silences, confusing behavior, and moments where they seem almost uncomfortable around you, just as things start going well. And here's the trap most people fall into. We interpret that discomfort as a lack of interest, or worse, a red flag that they're pulling away. But the truth, that strange behavior, that discomfort you're seeing, is often the first and rawest sign that something real is happening for them emotionally. They're not acting strange because they don't care. They're acting strange because they do. Avoidants aren't heartless. They're not broken, but they're wired to protect themselves. Often from a young age, they've learned that love, the deep, connected kind, is unpredictable, unsafe, or unreliable. Maybe they were emotionally neglected, maybe they had to grow up too fast, or maybe they just never had a model of consistent, secure love. So when someone comes into their life and offers that very thing, connection, presence, care, their entire nervous system goes into alert mode. A strange behavior you notice, it's not manipulation, it's not necessarily withdrawal, it's internal chaos manifesting externally. It's a conflict between two parts of them, the part that longs for love and the part that's terrified of it. And for many avoidants, the moment they start developing real feelings, things begin to shift. Not because they're backing away, but because they're stepping into emotional territory they've never safely navigated before. Imagine someone who has walked through the desert their whole life. Then you offer them an ocean. They don't know how to swim. Their first instinct isn't to dive in, it's to back up, to test the water, maybe even to push you away. That's not rejection, that's survival. And yet we often miss this subtle truth. The pushback from an avoidant isn't always a wall. It's a signal they're overwhelmed by the depth of what they're feeling. Here's what most people don't realize. Avoidants do feel love deeply, but the moment it shows up, their brain associates it with risk. Real intimacy activates ancient wounds. The closer someone gets to their heart, the more likely they are to press the eject button. Not because they want out, but because they don't want to lose control. Love for them isn't soft and warm at first. It's disorienting. So what happens? They start acting different. They become more reserved, even though they want to be closer. They become more inconsistent, not because they don't care, but because consistency feels exposing. They might even become irritable or uncomfortable around you because your presence brings them to the very edge of their emotional safety zone. And on the outside, it looks like they're pushing away, but internally, they're actually trying to manage the storm of emotion they've never been taught how to process. And the ironic part, their discomfort is the clearest signal that love is actually beginning to happen. See, avoidants don't show love through typical affectionate behaviors. They often show love through tension. If they're letting you see their awkwardness, if they're allowing themselves to be visibly uncomfortable or reactive, it means they trust you more than they trust their own instincts. It means you've reached a level of closeness that stirs up the very vulnerability they've spent years avoiding. And that's powerful, because that means if you're present enough to witness that strange behavior without personalizing it, if you can understand that discomfort as a signal, not a threat, you hold the key to a profound transformation, not just for the relationship, but for the avoidant themselves. Now let's be clear, this isn't about tolerating emotional immaturity or excusing toxic behavior. Boundaries still matter, communication still matters, but if you're emotionally intelligent, you'll see the distinction. There's a difference between someone who's playing games and someone whose inner world is shifting in real time because they're beginning to feel something real. So instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of chasing when they pull back, you anchor yourself. Instead of accusing them of not caring, you get curious. You observe the tension, you validate the growth. You don't demand closeness, you invite it. You don't try to force them into vulnerability, you create an atmosphere where it can safely emerge. Pickard. Because here's the secret. Avoidants need love just as much as anyone else. They just don't trust that it will last. They don't trust that they'll be accepted when they finally show their true messy selves. So when they do start to shift, when they start showing you the cracks in their armor, when they start behaving in ways that seem strange or out of character, that's not rejection. That's the first bloom of something sacred. It's love, unrefined, unpracticed, untamed, but real. And if you can hold that space, if you can see them, not just their behavior, but their inner conflict, you give them the experience of something they've never had before, the kind of love that doesn't run when things get messy, the kind of connection that doesn't panic at discomfort, the kind of partner who knows that awkwardness doesn't mean danger, it means growth is happening. So the next time you feel confused by how an avoidant starts acting, remember, it's not fear of you. It's not disinterest. It's love. Trying to grow inside someone who's still learning how to let it live. And the fact that it's messy, that doesn't make it less valuable. It makes it human. It makes it honest, because real love doesn't always walk in the front door with confidence. Sometimes it slips in through the cracks, disguised as hesitation, as tension, as strange behavior, but it's there, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be understood. And when it is, everything changes. Change is uncomfortable. Growth is awkward. And when it comes to relationships, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, that awkwardness doesn't always look like progress, but it is. Most people assume that when someone pulls back, changes their behavior, becomes inconsistent or emotionally distant, it's a sign that the relationship is deteriorating, that love is fading. But in the world of avoidant attachment, that change often doesn't mean a collapse. It means the very beginning of something transformational. Avoidants aren't used to love being safe. They're not used to intimacy, feeling stable. So when something real begins to form, when connection starts to deepen, it doesn't feel soothing at first. It feels destabilizing. It feels foreign. For them, closeness doesn't equal comfort. It equals risk. And when something feels risky, the brain starts to shift into self-protection mode. That shift, that internal recalibration, is what you're witnessing when they start acting off. You're seeing the emotional system of a person trying to adapt to something new. It's not that they don't want love. Is that love is new terrain, and anytime we step into something unfamiliar, we don't do it gracefully. We do it with hesitation, clumsiness, and resistance. That resistance isn't a lack of care. It's a lack of emotional muscle memory. So when an avoidant begins to change, when their patterns break, when their rhythms wobble, it's not necessarily a sign they're detaching. It might be the clearest sign that they're being stretched emotionally in ways they've never been before. It might be the uncomfortable echo of their inner world trying to expand. Think about it. When someone who has lived their entire life defending against vulnerability begins to feel emotionally drawn to you, they don't lean in immediately. They hesitate. They stutter. They might even shut down temporarily. Not because they've stopped feeling, but because they're starting to. And here's the kicker. Real love, the kind that transforms us, doesn't show up in our comfort zone. It disrupts us. It calls out the scared parts of us. It shines light on the protective patterns we've built to avoid getting hurt. And for an avoidant, that light can be blinding. They haven't built pathways to process the emotions that love awakens. They've built pathways to avoid them. So when love enters the picture, their old identity starts to crack. The armor they've worn their whole life begins to feel heavy, and that's when they begin to act strange. It's not sabotage, it's friction between who they were and who they're becoming. Imagine someone who's always walked in straight lines suddenly stepping into a spiral staircase. Their balance is off. They're not sure where to place their feet. That confusion isn't failure, it's transition. And that's exactly what happens emotionally for an avoidant in the early stages of real love. The inconsistency, the silence, the overreactions or underreactions, they're all signs of someone moving out of self-protection and into vulnerability, even if it's messy. But here's where most people get it wrong. We interpret the change as retreat instead of transformation. We judge the silence as indifference instead of reflection. We respond to their discomfort with our own by overanalyzing, chasing, or pulling away in return. And when we do that, we miss the opportunity to be present for one of the most significant emotional transitions a person can go through. Because make no mistake, falling in love for someone with an avoidant style is not light or easy. It's a psychological rewrite. It requires them to feel things they've spent years suppressing. It brings up fear, shame, guilt, and anxiety. They're not just falling for you. They're falling into themselves. And for many, that's terrifying. You might notice that they say less, even though they used to open up more. It's not a shutdown. That's internal processing. You might find them emotionally distracted or physically absent. That's not always withdrawal. Sometimes it's recalibration. You might even feel them challenging the relationship in subtle ways, testing boundaries, questioning closeness, pushing back against commitment. But these aren't always signs they're falling out of love. In many cases, it's the opposite. They're scared because the stakes have never felt this real. And this is where your emotional maturity gets tested, because it's easy to take it personally, easy to think you did something wrong. But if you can look beyond your triggers, if you can regulate your nervous system and respond from a place of compassion instead of fear, you can see the truth behind the tension. You can recognize that they're not running from you. They're confronting themselves. And if you can hold that space without rescuing or retreating, you give them the room to grow into a new emotional identity, one where love doesn't mean danger, one where connection doesn't equal control, one where vulnerability isn't punished but welcomed. But that space doesn't mean silence. It means presence, clear communication, healthy boundaries. It means saying, I see that you're going through something. I respect your process, and I'm here not to fix you, but to walk beside. Because that's what love does. It doesn't demand perfection. It invites transformation. It doesn't require people to be emotionally fluent. It offers a safe space to learn the language. And when you love an avoidant, that space becomes sacred. It becomes the bridge between their past and their future, a place where they can slowly, awkwardly, and authentically learn to stay. So the next time they act strange, don't panic. Pause. Breathe. Look closer. You might just be witnessing one of the most beautiful things in the world. Not someone pulling away, but someone coming home to themselves and choosing in their own imperfect way to let you in. Vulnerability doesn't come easily to someone with an avoidant attachment style. In fact, for most of their life, vulnerability felt like a trap, not a pathway to intimacy. So when they start to open up, when they begin to feel genuine affection, their behavior doesn't become more romantic or expressive right away. It actually becomes messier, more unpredictable. And that's because they're entering unfamiliar emotional territory, and they're doing it without a map. The moment an avoidant starts falling in love, they begin to experience an internal conflict that can't be solved by logic. The identity they've built, the one rooted in independence, control, and emotional distance, starts to clash with the real feelings they now carry. And that collision creates friction. Not because something is wrong, but because something is growing. And growth is never neat. You might notice small changes. They suddenly withdraw after a good date. They hesitate to say, "I miss you," even though it's written all over their face. They make plans, then cancel last minute. They seem emotionally hot and cold, and it leaves you confused. But what's actually happening beneath the surface is massive. Their nervous system is trying to adapt to intimacy in real time. For someone avoidant, love doesn't just challenge their beliefs about relationships, it threatens the core strategies that kept them emotionally safe. Letting someone in means dismantling walls that once protected them from pain, and that process, it's not polished or poetic. It's awkward, it's defensive, it's full of moments where they might say the opposite of what they feel, not because they're lying, but because the language of emotional openness is still foreign to them. And this is what makes the shift from self-protection to vulnerability so messy. They're not just learning how to be with you, they're learning how to be with themselves emotionally. And for many, this is the first time they're doing that, which means they will get it wrong. They will flinch. They will shut down when something tender is said. And then a moment later, they might do something incredibly intimate. A gesture, a glance, a truth slipped out. When their guard is down, those moments matter. They're not inconsistencies, they're breakthroughs. Because what looks like messiness on the surface is often transformation in motion. It's the dismantling of a protective self and the emergence of a vulnerable one. And if you can recognize that, if you can meet it with calm clarity rather than fear or pressure, you don't just witness growth, you help make it possible. The shift is slow, but it's real. And behind every awkward silence, behind every strange reaction, behind every moment of emotional discomfort is someone learning how to love in a way they've never done before. Most people assume that love should feel easy when it's right, that if two people are meant for each other, everything will fall into place effortlessly. But when you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, that belief doesn't hold up, because for them, love isn't just an emotion, it's a risk. And if you misunderstand their behavior, you may walk away just as they're starting to step forward. The problem isn't that avoidance don't love, it's that they love differently. They protect it, they hide it, they test it, even when they don't mean to. And if you interpret their tension or emotional distance as disinterest, you'll miss the deeper truth. You'll mistake their internal struggle for apathy. But it's not apathy, it's activation. Their entire nervous system is reacting to a level of closeness that feels unfamiliar and often unsafe, not because you're unsafe, but because closeness has always carried emotional consequences for them in the past. This is where most relationships break down, not because the love isn't real, but because one person interprets emotional confusion as emotional detachment. If you don't understand what's really happening inside the avoidant, you'll pull away just as they're trying to lean in. Awkwardly, hesitantly, imperfectly. That's the paradox. Right when they start to fall, their behavior often makes you believe they're backing away. And if you're not grounded, if you don't have the emotional intelligence to pause and look beyond the surface, you'll react instead of respond. You'll confront them, accuse them, or shut down. And in doing so, you confirm their worst fear, that closeness always leads to loss or rejection. But if you understand what's happening, if you see their discomfort as the sign of emotional growth, it truly is. You become something rare in their world. You become a safe presence, not someone who tolerates bad behavior, but someone who doesn't panic at emotional complexity, someone who doesn't interpret confusion as failure. Avoidants don't need someone to fix them. They need someone who sees them, who recognizes that when they start to act strange, it might not be the end. It might be the very beginning of love breaking through their armor. And that moment requires patience. It requires strength, not to wait forever, not to self-abandon, but to hold your center while they recalibrate. Because if you leave too soon, if you interpret their storm as a shutdown, you might walk away from a person who was never pulling away at all. They were just finally starting to feel something real. And that kind of love, it may not come easy, but it's worth understanding. So here's the truth. Love doesn't always enter our lives wrapped in perfect behavior. Sometimes it shows up in discomfort and hesitation, in the strange stuttered moments of someone trying to love you through their fear. And when that someone has an avoidant attachment style, their signals won't always make sense. They may say less when they feel more. They may act distant when their heart is drawing closer. They may fumble through connection like they're learning to walk again, because in many ways they are. You've got to understand their strange behavior isn't a rejection. It's a response to unfamiliar vulnerability. Their entire emotional system is being rewired in real time, not because they don't care, but because they finally do. And that shift isn't smooth. It's shaky, it's filled with contradiction, tension, and confusion. But underneath it, love is trying to grow. What you're witnessing is an avoidance. It's emergence. You're seeing a heart that spent years in hiding begin to unfold one uncomfortable step at a time. And if you're strong enough to hold space without rescuing, grounded enough to stay without chasing, wise enough to see fear as part of the process, you might just be the first person in their life to ever experience the real them.